Hello, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm in for Todd, and the rotating a Rolodex of hosts are continuing this morning. Todd, of course, getting ready for our election show tonight. You'll be able to listen to Todd with his intrepid panel as we bring you the election results after 8:30. So you'll have me for the next 3 hours here on the Todd Veinotte Show. It is Election Day, and no polls are open, and eligible voters are lining up to mark their ballots for the 42nd time in our province's history. Now, at stake is, of course, who will form the next government. Will it be a second go-around for Tim Houston and the Progressive Conservatives, or will we see the Liberals or NDP return to power? We will know later tonight. Again, our show begins at 8:30 with Todd Veinotte. Make sure that you tune in for all the results as they are released. Got a few emails from you saying that you were having an issue this morning with the Where Do I Vote tool on the Nova Scotia Elections Nova Scotia website. I got this from Elections Nova Scotia just moments ago. It reads, Elections Nova Scotia experiencing high call volumes this morning through our public call center and high traffic volume on our website. Unfortunately, this had caused service delays and connection issues. Elections Nova Scotia goes on to read, we appreciate voters' patience. The website now available again. We ask voters to please try again to connect by calling 1-800-565-1504 or use the Where Do I Vote tool at electionsnovascotia.ca. And literally, as we were coming on the air here just moments ago, I checked and it worked fine for me. So whatever glitch they had this morning seems to be fixed, and if you're looking for where you vote through that site, there is your option. Early voting numbers were in, 16,000 votes behind where we were last time around. I'm hoping to see a big voter turnout today, but I think I might be disappointed. And a word of warning this morning to everybody. We're going to open up the telephone lines at 11 o'clock today, but there are some rules that we have to follow on election days. There's a bunch of restrictions on what we can say and what we can't say on a voting day. So I'll ask you to stay away from the partisanship today surrounding the provincial election to ensure that we don't run afoul of the election laws. Tomorrow, those gloves, of course, come off, and we can debate the results all day if you want. But today, we have some rules to follow. So, and again, I'll mention that before we open up the lines at 11 o'clock today. Our other big story this morning was, of course, that tweet last night by Donald Trump that sent many Canadian business people into a tizzy, including our Canadian dollar. Donald Trump said yesterday he was going to add a 25% tariff on all imports to the U.S. from both Mexico and Canada until, his words, both countries stop drugs and people from illegally crossing the borders. Now, I'm not a business person nor an economist, but I can imagine what this means to anyone in Canada that does business in the United States. As of January 20-something, whatever day he becomes president, your goods suddenly are much more expensive for Americans to buy, 25% more expensive. Now imagine the impact of someone that sells parts or raw materials to the U.S. market, or maybe lobsters. I'll bet the reaction in the U.S. is a positive one this morning, but I wonder what the response will be when many of their consumer goods that Americans use every day that come from Canada, or probably more from Mexico, are suddenly 25% more expensive. Now, I know there's a lot of you listening this morning that like and support Donald Trump and support what he plans to do. Now, I wonder if this changes your mind at all. I'm looking forward to a vigorous chat during the open hour. That's going to happen today at 11 o'clock. But first, at last check, Canada Post reporting that they've missed out, I think, 11 million, the number's up to, parcels over the last 12 days or so that unionized workers have been on strike. The company also reporting like a $300 million loss last quarter. Please welcome to the program Canada Post spokesperson John Hamilton. John, how are you?
I'm not too bad, Dan. Thanks for having me on.
So let's begin there. Where are we at with the negotiations? Are they continuing? Are we still at the table?
Yeah, we're still at the table. Just talked to the team this morning. They're still at the hotel, hoping to hammer out a deal. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to move forward with the kind of urgency that we would hope. We're now in the busiest holiday shopping season of the year, and we're shut down now on day 12 by KW's national strike.
The last I've heard, and the last communication I've received, I got this morning from Canada Post, says that the talks, or the progress on the talks, is limited. What's the main stumbling block here? What are we stuck on?
Well, it's unfortunately a lot of things. We've been focused in our approach to protect and enhance what's important to our employees, wage increases, and protect their defined benefit pension, their job security and things like that. But we need to update our delivery model. It was built for mail, Monday to Friday. We need to be able to provide weekend delivery, add permanent part-time positions as well as some full-time positions. The union wants more to add full-time employees, which doesn't add the flexibility that we need. But just so you understand what's going on at the table, that's what we were talking about on the weekend, the delivery model, how we can be flexible in terms of staffing and things like that. The union was focused more on bringing into Canada Post our contracted cleaning staff, our transport truck drivers that we contract with to become full-time Canada. So these are people that aren't even part of Canada Post or represented by the union. So as we were entering into our busiest week, that's where the discussions had to focus. So it was, we didn't move where we needed to. So we haven't even really got to wages yet because we've been caught up in these issues that are kind of outside of where things should be within the collective agreement.
John, the latest communication I have is that Canada Post is down over 11 million parcels as with this strike goes along. What kind of financial impact will that have on Canada Post?
Oh, it's massive. The one area of growth in the delivery business is the parcel business, but it's become a lot more competitive during the pandemic. Everybody developed a really big habit called online shopping and got really good at it. So there's growth to be had there. But competitors can do it faster and cheaper than us. We think we can still be there. We serve all Canadians. Nobody gets left behind when delivering through Canada Post. And we can still have good paying jobs. Over 2/3 of our employees make over $30 an hour plus cost of living allowances and things like that. But there's only so far we can go, and we need to look at creating some part-time jobs to provide that kind of flexibility. So that's where we're focused. But if you look at our financial results, $300 million loss in the last quarter. We're up over $800 million on the year, and that's on top of the billions in losses we've had since 2018 because the world's changed. Mail's been dropping for 20 years. Everybody knows that, but we've lost a lot of ground in the parcel market because the competitors can do it, more conveniently than we can. And if we can't come out of this with a change in our delivery model that allows us to compete on weekends, people shopping on a Friday and getting it on a Saturday or Sunday at a reasonable cost, we're just going to shrink further and further.
John, if we waved a magic wand and you started weekend delivery tomorrow, would that wipe out that $300 million loss, or is that a part of it?
It's a part of it. You look at our mandate, and it's been the same since 1985, is to be, self-sufficient based on the revenues we can bring in. So obviously we need to focus on growing our revenues. The last few years, our operating expenses have been higher than our revenues, and obviously that's where you get the losses from. So we need to change that, but we also need to, we're working with the government on ensuring that, how we deliver mail was put in place in 2008. A lot's changed since then. So I think what we're seeing through this is there are a lot of people that rely on Canada Post, small businesses, charities, rural, remote, and northern communities. They're really hurting right now, and that's really, really unfortunate. But it means that we need to look to the future and see what Canadians are looking for, because at the end of the day, we provide a service. We're a service-first organization, and Canadians have changed so much in the last few years, especially the last two coming out of the pandemic, and we're not built for that yet. So we need to work together with our union. That's what we're trying to do, to find that path forward that allows us to continue to provide good-paying jobs, many of them in Nova Scotia, and then, but find a way to meet the customer's demands, because the days of just saying, well, here's the service we provide. If you don't like it, too bad. That's not going to work anymore, and we need to be better at that.
John, we've obviously taken a number of calls on this over the last 12 days that the strike's been underway, and a number of those callers are suggesting that Canada Post should become a private company and be privatized. Is that the direction we're heading?
That's not for us to say, and that's not our approach. We think, we've been a Crown corporation forever. The Postal Service has been part of the fabric of Canada since before Confederation. So, and it's built to serve this country. So there is a future there, but we've got to be different, and we can't try and hold on to the past. But I hear. We're looking at taking things. We're not taking things away from current or our current employees. We're looking at maybe a bit of a new deal for employees that we hire in the future, but it'll be up to them whether they want to take that deal and come and work for us. We have to look at how we can reduce our costs and focus on our customers. And the reality is, we're just not there today.
John, a labor negotiator, once told me that it's always a positive sign when talks continue, and that's doing that. Are you confident that you'll be able to come together with the union for a collective agreement, or are we still looming at the federal government here and legislation?
No, we're still committed to the process. We have some fantastic negotiators, and they've been patiently working through all the issues and putting forward solutions. And there's been a lot of good discussions over the last year. We started these negotiations over a year ago with a lot of good, open, frank discussions with the union about what the future looked like and the challenge facing the postal system. And, we thought that we'd be in a much better position now, but unfortunately, we're not. And the reality is, when we're losing hundreds of millions of dollars every year, adding more and more full-time employees, that would be fantastic. But with their job security provisions, it's a job until they retire. And then with the defined benefit pension plan, it's money until, you cease to exist. So it's a long-term commitment for Canada Post. Not saying we don't want to be there down the road if we can turn things around. But 95% of our delivery employees are full-time today. We need to add some part-time and some full-time as well. But just adding more and more employees to the system that we have today that's built for yesterday is only going to cause the postal system to shrink and be further challenged.
John, you mentioned pensions. That we've had a couple of conversations with reps from the union, and they say that they're unable to retire on that pension plan. Is that on the table? Are you going to change the pension?
The defined benefit pension plan is like when you retire at Canada Post, you have a defined benefit pension plan, not through management. We stopped that 15 years ago. We have a defined contribution. But a defined benefit pension plan puts the risk on the employer and the pension, and we've saved money, and that pension plan's done well. But that's a pension plan with indexing. So as inflation goes, retirees get a raise as well. There aren't many companies that provide a defined benefit pension plan anymore. You find that in the federal government. But it's secure. What we're looking at is a defined contribution plan for people that we hire in the future, just like we've been doing for management for the last 15 years. And some will say, well, if you don't have people paying into the pension, then you don't have money for the people retiring. That's not how pensions work. Pensions, you have to invest the funds and ensure that you can make that commitment to that employee long term. And that fund has been very well managed. If you're worried about bringing in more people to the pension plan so that you can pay the people that are actually on retirement, that's not a pension, that's a Ponzi scheme. So that's not what we have, that's what we are. But we're looking to the future to say, we can't afford that pension for the new people that we hire, but we're talking about that at the bargaining table.
John, appreciate your time.
Dan, thank you very much for having me on.
That is John Hamilton, spokesperson for Canada Post. We are into day 12 now. Latest number, 11 million parcels or deliveries have been passed up by Canada Post as the strike continues on. Makes you wonder how a Crown corporation, even a Crown corporation, can continue to function, losing $300 and some odd million every quarter. Maybe the calls for privatization will gain momentum as we get a closer look into the books at Canada Post. We're going to stop down and take a break. When we come back, what did that rain do to the situation at Lake Major? A conversation about Lake Major and the water supply. When we return, you're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. We're back in minutes. Well, welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. You think I'd been gone for 5 years. I don't know where the buttons are anymore or anything else. Todd moving stuff around in here and Steve moving stuff. Anyway, then listen to me complain. Anyway, you may be asking, where is Todd? Well, Todd is prepping himself. He will be on the air tonight at 8:30 for our election show. We'll open up the show right after the polls close. The polls close at 8 o'clock tonight. Todd will be here at 8:30. He's got a fantastic panel of guests to join him to put some context on all the results. And you can get them all right here at 95.7 News Radio, beginning at 8:30. So that being said, you're going to have to deal with me today. Vanessa's going to have to deal with me today, which is a big job to begin with anyway. If you remember back, I think it was the 14th of November. That's going back a bit now. We got a notification from Halifax Water that the summer and the fall that we had just had that was pretty dry has had an impact on the water levels out at Lake Major, and that people living on the Lake Major water supply were asked to voluntarily kind of cut back on their consumption in an effort to try and stabilize things out there. It's been a couple of weeks and big rain on the weekend, so I wonder what, if anything, has changed out there. Very pleased to welcome to the program from Halifax Water, Brittany Smith. Brittany, how are you?
Morning. How are you?
I am well. I guess that's the first question. Has the rain as of late changed anything at Lake Major?
Well, the rain over the weekend was very helpful. Unfortunately, it's not enough for us to lift any of the water conservation requests. And we still need a significant amount of rain to get the lake levels back to normal.
So we're getting there, but we're not there yet.
Yeah, our data shows that 61 millimeters fell at Lake Major over the weekend, the past few days, and that it has had a positive impact, and the lake has risen up to 18.3 meters, but unfortunately it was down over 1 meter before the rainfall, so we still need more rain there.
Were you able to detect a change once you asked for the voluntary measures? Were people following along and cutting their consumption?
So we witnessed the most significant decrease in demand on the day we issued the conservation request, so 2 Thursdays ago. And we're estimating that the conservation measures have decreased approximately 7% of the daily demand.
So people got the message on day one and then maybe a little bit lax moving forward.
We still are seeing a decrease, so folks are still conserving their water.
So for those that are maybe just catching on to this, Lake Major supplies a bunch of communities on the Dartmouth side of the Harbour, correct?
Yes, so serves Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage, North Preston, Westphal, and Burnside. And that's approximately over 100,000 customers.
What are you asking them to do? What are you asking them to help? How can they help?
If it's yellow, let it mellow. So depending on the efficiency of your toilet, each flush uses between 6 and 26 liters of water, as well as shorten your shower. So cut back on the frequency and the lengths of your showers. Turn off the taps when you don't need it. So when you're brushing your teeth, shaving, washing your face, don't keep the tap running the whole time. And if you do have a dishwasher, make sure those loads are full before running the dishwasher. And when doing laundry, just make sure your loads are full. So just being cautious of how much water you're actually utilizing.
Brittany, do you check it every day? Do you check it a couple times a day? How do you check the water levels?
Oh, yes. Our teams are checking daily and comparing that to the demand as well.
So, this is a crystal ball question, but any idea how long we're going to have to stay on, or those people are going to have to stay on those measures?
So we're currently working on a temporary solution. We've already implemented a few. We are pumping water across the McDonald Bridge line, which from Pock Walk over to Lake Major. So that's helped with some of the demand, as well as of last Friday, bulk fill stations in Dartmouth will be closed for haulers, and they'll be diverted to the Pock Walk system.
Brittany, this isn't the first time that Lake Major has seen a significant water level decrease, and we've had restrictions on. Is there a particular reason why this lake seems to be the one that gets low very quickly?
Yeah, so the Lake Major water intake, as currently designed, does not account for significantly lower water levels, which we've seen this past year. So there's still plenty of water in the lake. The issue is that the intake is unable to get down to those lower water levels.
And I understand that there is an engineering plan that's in the works, if not already on the books, to fix that.
Yeah, so we're currently working on a solution which would place a temporary intake at a deeper level of the lake where it's not as vulnerable to our current weather.
Brittany, appreciate your time.
Perfect. Thank you, Dan.
That is Brittany Smith, spokesperson for Halifax Water. So we're getting there, but we're not there yet, is the bottom line on that. People living in Dartmouth, Burnside, Cole Harbour, Westphal, North Preston, and Eastern Passage are asked to voluntarily reduce their intake of water, to watch the flushes on the toilet and shorten the showers, and to turn the tap off when you're not using it, and making sure that your laundry and your dishwasher is full. I don't know what the long-range forecast looks like. We'll have to figure that out on Friday with Alistair Alders. But if we got 61 millimeters of rain at Lake Major on the weekend, and we've been almost, 2 weeks into this now, and we're still not there, you can see that that water, I think it was down like a full meter, like 3 feet. It was below where it should be, I guess, where it would normally be this time of the year. So it takes a while to fill that up, and we just heard that there's an engineering plan in place to try and fix that intake so that we don't have to go through this. I think this is the third time since 2016 or 2017 that we've had this kind of problem at Lake Major. We're going to stop, take a break. Blake is going to join us and update us on what's going on in the news. On the other side of it, an interesting program and an interesting look at African-centric early childhood education. Something that was talked about a few months ago or a few years ago, and now we're getting a closer look at it. Research identified that African-centric early childhood education program at NSCC is a community asset to bring strength to the early childhood sector in Nova Scotia and will help to dismantle anti-Black racism. We're going to dig into this and what it means moving forward when we have a conversation with with Dr. Barbara Hamilton-Hinch. When we come back, you're listening to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. We're back in minutes. Welcome back to The Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Alstrand. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Don't forget, coming up at the top of the hour, the open hour. Lots to talk about. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you. But before that, early childhood educators play, of course, a critical role in the quality of early learning and childcare and is setting for the foundation for anti-racist and culturally responsive environments. Now, earlier work by a team at the Mount and Dalhousie identified that early childhood settings in Nova Scotia take a mainstream approach to curriculum, which negates the cultural identity of and creates unsafe environments for African, Nova Scotian, and Black educators, families, and children. The research also identified the African-centric early childhood education diploma program at NSCC as a community asset, bringing strength to early childhood sector in Nova Scotia and to begin dismantling anti-Black racism. Very pleased to welcome to the program Dr. Barb Hamilton-Hinch, who is an associate professor at the School of Health and Human Performance, and an assistant vice provost, equity and inclusion at Dalhousie University. Dr. Hamilton-Hinch, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me this morning.
This is an interesting project. Tell me a little bit about the genesis. Why did we decide to further pursue this?
Well, I've been working with the group of researchers that you mentioned, Jessie McIsaac and Crystal Watson, for some time on a previous research where we actually interviewed parents of children who were in daycare. And this time we took it the next step and wanted to interview some of the teachers that were graduates of the Afrocentric cohort out of the community college to see how they would be able to apply some of their learnings in the daycares that they would be employed in. It's important to point out that not all of the participants who engaged in the research are working in a dominant Black daycare. Some are working in what we would refer to as predominantly white institutions or daycares. And so it was fascinating to learn how they were applying their learning around Afrocentricity even into those spaces.
What did you learn during this project?
Well, we learned about the importance of an Afrocentric framework, particularly when we're working with all children, but to be able to center Black children at a very, very early age in their identity and who they are, bring curriculum into those spaces that reflect them is very, very important. I think it's important to note that I identify as African Nova Scotian and have raised two boys that are African Nova Scotian. And I know the importance of being exposed to that material early and having teachers who reflect you. That strong expression that if you see it, you believe it, you could become it. And even being able to influence other young children at such an early age on the importance of Afrocentricity can have an impact in those children's lives throughout their entire education.
How does it work? Do we teach the collective group in different cultures, or how does that work?
That's a very good question. So the participants that engaged in our research were educators. They were students who took the Afrocentric Early Education Program at the Nova Scotia Community College under the leadership of Justin West and Moshella Short. Those were two of the key instructors. And so these students would have traveled through their cohort together, all Black students being taught predominantly by Black instructors and learning from an Afrocentric perspective. So they would have brought in material and curriculum as teachers. So they were being taught as teachers, looking at material around Afrocentricity, using those Asaba principles, Mbutu, I am because you are. Each of their classes start with an affirmation of who they are as people of African descent. So really grounding themselves early in their learning. And then they had community partners such as the East Preston Daycare, which is a well-known daycare in the African Nova Scotian community, just recently celebrated over 50 years of its existence. Support from the Family Resource Center and the YWCA were also part of that. So the teachers themselves were first learning about Afrocentricity and then how to apply those principles when they get employed in early childhood education.
You mentioned that some of this cohort have been working in predominantly white daycare or early childhood centers. Did they get pushback when they tried to bring this approach in?
Well, some talked about, and I don't know if it would be surprising to some of our listeners, that sometimes they didn't always feel safe. That they had to sometimes push for the curriculum to be accepted. We used a photo voice process when they were doing this project. So the participants, which again were those who were already graduate from the cohort, would take pictures with permission of things that were meaningful for them. Some of the pictures might have been pictures of children doing play. Some of them might have been pictures of things that meant something to them, like sitting by the water. One participant talked about how she didn't feel safe asking a colleague to take a picture for her. And so that speaks volumes of what that loneliness might feel like, because some of these teachers would be the only Black teacher in that space. And so the pushback didn't always happen, but in some cases they did experience it. Even in our public school system, often it's teachers of African descent that are advocating to celebrate things like African Heritage Month. So some talked about that challenge of having to push to celebrate African Heritage Month in the early childhood centers and bringing in some of the different curriculum that they want to present. For the most part, many were receptive, but there was some pushback towards some of the programs that people wanted to bring in.
Tell me a little bit about the event that you have planned for Thursday night.
Well, the event took place, and it was absolutely amazing. We had the event of Thursday night is having different educators come in. We opened it up to the public. The participants were there with their photo voice, with their books and the materials and the curriculum. And because we use photo voice, we wanted to have it set up like a gallery. And so people had the opportunity to walk around, see the images that the participants took, reflect on what it meant to learn and to teach from an Afrocentric perspective. We had a number of folks there from the early childhood education department. We had community members. We had early childhood educators that were really there to learn about how can they incorporate some of these great ideas into their own programs. As a parent my kids are in their 20s, I was fascinated to be part of this research and see toys that didn't exist for my children. So there would be doll heads where you grew up as a young person braiding hair on these doll heads. And now you had doll heads that reflected diversity. So there were doll heads that were of African descent. There were doll heads that were white. They showed materials and books. So there was a book on RuPaul, which you would not think of being in an early childhood education center. But it was amazing seeing a children's book written about RuPaul and being celebrated. They had a number of textural items that were on their table for people to touch and look. And books are really important that reflect the children from diverse communities. So it's fantastic seeing a number of their early childhood education books that were there that reflected students or children of African descent.
What's next? Where do you take this? You had this session. You had a brainstorming session as well on Thursday at the Buddy Day Learning Institute. Now, where do you take this information? What do you do with it?
Well, obviously, as researchers and working with the community and with the Nova Scotia Community College, and we are hoping that the community college commits to having these Afrocentric early childhood education programs because they are needed. We need to make sure that every early childhood education center, including our 4+ programs, are impacted by having early childhood educators that are coming from diverse backgrounds, particularly those of African descent. So I'm really hopeful that the program itself continues. I'm hopeful that we'll continue to be able to influence the curriculum in all early childhood education centers. That's very important to develop children who are more well-rounded, as well as faculty and staff who are more appreciative of diversity, particularly the African Nova Scotian and the culture of people of African descent. We continue to hope to follow the participants that have engaged in this project with us and perhaps add more, another phase to it, and see how they're continuing to apply these principles. Because it can be very easy to feel frustrated and beaten down if you have pushback. And so it'll be great to see how they're doing in another 2 or 3 years, the impact. It might even be great to have a chance to talk to some of the parents who have been engaged in some of these programs where the curriculum has focused from an Afrocentric perspective. So there's many areas that we could go with this research, but I know we're not finished with it because I strongly believe that we can influence children, parents, teachers at an early age. It certainly develops a strong foundation for success in further education.
Dr. Hamilton-Hinch, I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you for the interview and for the time as well.
That is Dr. Barb Hamilton-Hinch, Associate Professor at the School of Health and Human Performance and Assistant Vice Provost Equity and Inclusion at Dalhousie University. When we come back, lessons learned from a recent Scotiabank outage. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. We're back in minutes. Welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Olstrand. Hope you're having a fantastic day. It is the week of Black Friday. It is the week, almost a week until Cyber Monday. And we are in that, what's the word I'm looking for, in that consumer mode. There's going to be an awful lot of online shopping and things happening over the next couple of days. We know that that may be impacted here in Canada a little bit because of the Canada Post strike. I don't know about you, but I have certainly been watching things with the sales that are coming in and, seeing, okay, well, if I ordered that, is that coming from a courier? Is that coming from Canada Post? In fact, I've ordered a couple things for Christmas. Yeah, I've got some of my Christmas shopping done already. And I've had it actually, the click and collect is becoming a thing for me where you can just click and collect it at the store. Let the store worry about the shipping and the postal strike. Hopefully the postal strike gets fixed and we don't have to worry about it, but it doesn't sound like that's going to happen anytime soon. Anyway, this is a long build-up to the next segment of the program. If you remember back, I think it was about a month ago, there was a pretty big outage at Scotiabank. Many people didn't get paid and had trouble getting access to their funds. And then I think a couple weeks later, there was another outage where it was a planned maintenance thing, and again, the same outcome for many Scotiabank customers. Obviously, some experts taking a look at this and seeing how we can better protect ourselves against these things because, let's face it, they're becoming more and more mainstream when we have these outages, and it's not just the banking sector that is the main target of this, right? There's outages with your utilities. There's outages with your phone company. There's I mean, Rogers has had outages. There's many different big companies that are impacted by this. We're very pleased to welcome to the program Tony Anscombe, who is a Chief Security Evangelist at ESET. Tony, welcome to the program.
Hi, Dan. Good to be here.
I need the first question. What exactly is a Chief Security Evangelist?
It means I go around and talk a lot, Dan.
Fair.
Just like you as a broadcaster, but I go around to lots of conferences and trying to help keep people safe online.
So you're preaching good habits is what you're preaching.
Exactly.
Tony, these outages, it seems, and this is just anecdotal from my experience, that they're becoming more common. Am I wrong?
Well, is it that they're becoming more common, or is it we're becoming more reliant on online services? I'm not too sure which, but I think it might be a mix of both.
How do we, the digital world is where we live now, right? This is where, I don't even carry cash anymore. And how do I is that bad?
I think the not carrying cash is a really interesting one, because I don't really carry that much cash either. But one of the things I'd actually recommend is everybody puts $20 or whatever it is, enough money to get you home in the back of your phone case, so that if everything else breaks down, you can still get home.
We're going to have to learn how to deal with these things, or is it incumbent on us to be better prepared for an outage, or should it be incumbent on the providers to have better systems and better security?
Well, this kind of has two parts to it, doesn't it? I mean, the services we rely on, such as banks, but it's not just the bank. Remember, the bank uses a payment network, or they use other networks to process their payments. So it's not just the bank, it's the entire financial model. I think they need to get a little bit smarter in making sure they provide a resilient service. Some of this maintenance operations, when you see that they're going to be down from 6 o'clock in the morning to 10 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday morning, great, but that could be 2 o'clock to 6 o'clock, couldn't it? And completely out of the scope while most people are in bed. So I think they could get better at doing their maintenance in off hours and in a more robust way. But I think at the end of the day, it's the inconvenience to us. I think we need to be a little bit more prepared. And one of the things I'd recommend, Dan, is in your wallet, along next to that $20 or whatever it is that I recommend you carry, that you actually have two cards, and two different organizations. If you're carrying a Visa card, make sure you've got an Amex card or a MasterCard next to it. Even if you never use it, it's just a great backup to have.
Right. And I mentioned before that it's not just the banking sector that we're seeing this. We, in fact, this morning we're having an election here in Nova Scotia today, and there's a website where you log into, and you can pump your address in there, and it'll tell you where to vote, right? And it crashed this morning because of the high volumes. That's something that we that's tough to prepare for, is what I'm getting at, right?
Well, that one should be prepared for. I mean, how many voters there are. Roughly how much traffic was going to be coming towards that server. However, I will say, in some of these instances, disruptions such as denial of service attacks or such like happen on election days. I'm not saying that's what caused your system outage, by the way.
Yeah.
But my point is, there are things outside of the scope of normal traffic, even if you've prepared for it, that sometimes cause these outages.
Tony, we've been watching world events unfold before us, of course. So we hear of denial of service attacks coming from foreign entities. We see them coming from inside our own country. These things, it's tough to stay in front of them, right? The bad guys tend to be a little bit further ahead than the good guys.
Yeah, unfortunately, denial of service attacks they're relatively easy to launch for somebody wanting to cause that type of disruption, using lots of machines on the internet or generating traffic some other way, all aimed at one place. Then, of course, just causes system outage. I mean, we see it when legitimate traffic happens as well. You think big Taylor Swift concert comes to town, and suddenly you hear that the ticket company is down. Or have it struggling with traffic, and that's because so many people go to it. So it's not always malicious, but it's about being prepared for that traffic.
Tony, we're moving, as I mentioned earlier, to it seems every day closer to a completely digital world. I guess your advice to people to protect themselves as we become more and more dependent on the phone and on the digital realm?
Well, one of the things is when you see an outage, such as the recent Scotiabank outage, sometimes you have to be super aware. And the reason being is your cyber criminals will jump on anything and they'll jump on it really quickly. If suddenly in your inbox lands an email saying, hey, we realize you can't get to your normal banking site, but you can log on here. We've temporarily put this one up. It may well be, cyber criminal taking advantage of the situation. So we as the consumer need to be super aware of what cyber criminals may well do. So our reliance on the digital environment, so to speak, requires us to be aware of needing to secure our digital environment in the same way we don't leave our front door open when we leave the house. We need to make sure that we're aware of our surroundings.
These phishing scams are getting more and more complex and better and better. It used to be pretty easy to spot them when they hit the email box, but the criminals are getting much more sophisticated.
They are, and you say that, Dan, and even I have trouble sometimes with the complexity of them getting so good recently. Is even I'm the one mousing over the address to see whether it's real or not. So I'm just saying there are a lot of people that don't have maybe the scrutiny that I would put on an email or the experience to spot the scam. But if something looks out of context, i.e. you're receiving something you didn't expect or it's asking you to take an action, then treat it as fraudulent until you've proven it's not fraudulent. And I think that's a really good piece of advice is, discount it until you've proven it's actually legitimate. And the other thing I'd say is, of course, make sure you run and have an active subscription to a cybersecurity piece of software. Obviously, I work for a cybersecurity company. And the importance of that and having it up to date is a lot of the phishing scams that will get detected, get removed, or you'll get blocked from clicking. So they are out there to protect you as well.
Tony, appreciate your time. Great information.
Oh, my pleasure. Anytime, Dan.
That is Tony Anscombe. He is a chief security evangelist at ESET, is a cybersecurity company. They really are becoming difficult to discern, and you get them all the time. My phone rings probably 3 or 4 times a week with somebody saying that my Amazon package is delayed or it's stuck in customs or whatever else. And at this time of the year, when you have many perhaps packages or deliveries that you're expecting or you were sending to people, it's pretty easy to fall victim to it, right? It really is. And it used to be they're full of spelling mistakes or the language was off and everything else, but they are getting more and more and more sophisticated. So best to be wary, particularly heading into this Black Friday, Cyber Monday / Christmas season. We're going to stop down, take a break. Blake is going to update us on what's going on in the world. And on the other side of it, it's time for the open hour. There are a lot of subjects to talk about. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you. The telephone lines are open. The number is 902-405-6000. We're back in minutes.
Facts.
Welcome back. This is the Todd Veinotte Show. It's time for the open hour. The telephone lines are open, 902-405-6000. I don't have a lot of rules when it comes to the open hour, as I have been doing this for a couple months now. But today, there are a couple of rules that we have to abide by. They're not my rules. They're the rules that govern us during election days. There is a set of rules to ensure that elections are fair and that there's no undue influence on voters that may be driving to or walking to or standing in line at a polling station. There are a lot of things that we can't talk about during an election day. So I will ask that if you want to talk about the provincial election today, keep the partisanship out of it. We can be as partisan as you want tomorrow and from every day on forward. But today we have to follow the rules, and that really is the only rule that I have today. That's, of course, one of the big stories today. The other one I know many of you want to talk about, and it was funny because, as you probably know, I was reading the news this morning, and I saw this came across the wires, and I'm like, oh, people are going to want to talk about this today. This could have a major, if it already hasn't, a major impact on the Canadian economy, and that President-elect Donald Trump intends to sign an executive order on day one of his presidency imposing a 25% tariff on imports from Canada and from Mexico. He says the hefty tariff will stay in place until both countries stop drugs and people from illegally crossing the borders. And as I mentioned during the beginning monologue of the show this morning, I know that many of you out there that are listening to me today, and some of you that are on the line, are fans of Donald Trump and support what he's trying to do. And I wonder if this changes your mind on anything. I wonder if this, we know that there was that he was bantering around a 10% tariff. Now he's changed his mind to 25%. Imagine, if you will, if you're a manufacturer, if you're a lobster person, if you're if you manufacture goods, if you send raw materials, if you spend or do a lot of your business in the United States, your goods on January, whatever day it is that he gets inaugurated, will become 25% more expensive for Americans to buy. I'm interested if you are a business owner out there that does a lot of business in the United States, what this means to your bottom line. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's begin this morning with Sean. Sean, how are you?
I'm good, Dan. Thanks. Dan, I want to get in on this tariff talk there
Sure.
and stuff. But first, I just want to add, why aren't we hearing much about Donald Trump's cabinet picks anymore? Because I think there's a lot of groundbreaking picks that are at the table. Because remember how the media and everybody was pushing that Donald Trump was going to be the threat to democracy. He was going to ban gay people and ban LGBT communities and stuff. Well, I find it very crazy that we're not hearing that. His latest Treasury pick, do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Secretary of Treasury. Yeah, Scott Bessent. This guy is an openly gay man. He's married.
Uh-huh.
He's got two kids, and he'll be the highest-ranking LGBTQ member to serve in the American government. So I think the rhetoric on Trump, it's going to start to change, and it has to. And then I guess that's what I want to say on that. And not to mention he's got blacks, whites, lots of women. Pam Bundy, she's going to be fierce.
25% in tariff. Let's talk about the tariffs.
Yeah. So do you think tariffs are a good thing for a country or a bad thing for a country?
Well, they're a bad thing for a country trying to do business with a country, and it's a bad thing for the people buying stuff inside the country. Tariffs don't work.
Well, but that only affects if you have a bad leader in your country, like Justin Trudeau.
Hang on.
Climate activist.
What?
And I'm going to explain that, Dan.
You better, because it doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so I'll explain it like this. So you know the Toyota Tundra truck?
Okay.
Right? Years ago, they are a very, very high popular truck in the United States of America. It's one of the top sellers, right? It's a Japanese company, right? So if you go to Japan, you don't see any Fords or Chevys or things like that driving on the streets because the tariffs are too high to import them into the country to sell them, right? So back to the Toyota Tundra. That years ago, the tariffs were put in on Toyota, and what they did is it forced Toyota to build a factory in the United States to start producing the Toyota Tundra in the United States to avoid the tariffs. So it brought down the price of the Toyota Tundra, and it got the country.
So what are you talking? What are you telling the guy that's out in the boat this morning, dumping day, putting his traps in the water, that is going to have to pay or have 25% tariff put on his lobster tomorrow?
Well, I mean,
how does that work? How are they going to grow lobsters in the U.S.?
No, but
it's $1 billion industry, Sean. It's $1 billion industry in Nova Scotia.
I understand. I don't want to argue. I'm just saying, but that's a bargaining chip for our leader to say, okay, well, we're not going to sell you lobster. We're going to sell it somewhere else.
Where?
We're going to sell it in our country for cheaper. and matter of fact, and then we cut down our own trees here. I have a carpentry business. That's what I do. I'm a developer. I'm building, right? So our trees get chopped down here, sent down to the United States, milled into lumber, and sold back to us.
Because of why? Sean, why do they have to do that?
Because our government will keep putting in these extreme climate policies that won't allow us to build these factories.
Sean, do you know what the softwood lumber tariff is?
But again, it's an example. Like, I'm not.
But it's a bad example because they have to send the logs to the U.S. because we have to pay a tariff for the lumber to cross the border.
Exactly.
So,
but what if we built the factories here and we didn't have to send the lumber there? That would give us huge.
The factories are here, Sean. They have sawmills in Canada, believe it or not.
But they're closing them left, right, and center.
Because they can't afford the tariff that the U.S. has put on the softwood lumber. Do you see where I'm going with this?
I understand, but if we build it in our own country,
we do.
Build the lumber, we create more, Dan, more. We don't need to send lumber to the United States. If we build these factories and processes here, then we have a bargain.
Sean, you don't understand, even have a clue how that tariff works, do you?
What do you mean, Dan? It's a tariff. What don't I understand?
The United States, Sean, my turn to talk now. The United States puts a tariff on softwood lumber imports from Canada.
Yes.
Right? So in order to make it so that they can make some money, they send the logs to the United States because they're not lumber, they're logs.
Yeah.
So by building 500,000 more sawmills in Canada, they have nowhere to sell their product.
We sell it to we produce the product and sell it to the market as lumber, Dan.
Yeah, but they have to pay a tariff, and they can't make any money on the tariff. That's why it's there.
But the bargaining chip is there for our country, Dan, is what I'm saying. These are bargaining chips that our leader...
So Donald Trump is to move back to where we were, Donald Trump is right to put a 25% tariff on every single thing crossing the border.
100%.
Sean, have a great day. I appreciate it, sir. I'm going to move on. 902-405-6000. Sean says he's right on. Donald Trump is 100% right to put that tariff on. Is a bargaining chip. What do you think? 902-405-6000 is the number. We're going to take our first break. You're listening to The Open Hour. I'm Dan Alstrand. Back in minutes.
How do you like me now? How do you like me now? Now that I'm on my way, you still think I'm crazy. Standing here today, I couldn't.
The late, great Toby Keith. It's funny, whenever big stories happen, and I'm getting ready for either for this, or I'm doing what I do on the other side of the glass when I read the news, a song usually pops into my head, right? It's usually, whatever this was. But this was the song that popped into my head when I first read the story this morning about Donald Trump and his plan on day one to add 25% tariff, or it's easy just to say tax, on every single good that Canadians sell in the United States. Our biggest trading partner, 75% of all exported goods, at least that's what I read this morning, go to the United States. And the reason why the Toby Keith song popped in my head is as you heard just from our last caller, and for many of these weeks that we've been talking about Donald Trump, there's a lot of you out there that supported Donald Trump, that agree with what he's doing, and I'm curious if that's changed with this tariff tactic. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Ryan to the program. Ryan, how are you?
I'm doing okay. You've had a minute to calm down now.
Yeah, I feel better, thanks.
Sean really has to spend more time reading and less time talking, I think. And I mean that with the utmost respect. So he made a lot of points that were just completely wrong. The reason you don't see American trucks sold in Japan or in China and many other places like that is because the American vehicles don't meet the emission standards of those countries. It's got nothing to do with tariffs. That aside, you want to point to the Japanese auto manufacturers, right? And it's a completely different conversation, but back in the 70s, when they started flooding the market in North America, we didn't tariff the crap out of them because it was part of competition. And that's part of what Trump is trying to do with these tariffs. I mean, as a Canadian, it's bad for us. There's just no two ways about that. It's going if those get implemented, it's going to hurt our economy a lot.
People are going to go to business.
Well, yeah. But I'm not convinced that that's actually going to happen. I mean, he likes to blow a lot of hot air. That being said, it's a protectionist measure, right? They want to bring more manufacturing back into the United States, and putting tariffs on all these goods helps that. Now they're saying it's because of illegal immigration and drugs and that kind of stuff. And I always find that argument interesting. I mean, we could turn that around on them pretty easily.
Very easily, right?
Yeah. There's twice as many people, or if not more, that cross the U.S. border into Canada than the other way around.
Well, I don't know that number for a fact, but I do know that more drugs come to Canada than leave Canada. And how about the guns? And how about everything else that comes across the border?
The guns was the next thing out of my lips. Yeah, exactly. I mean, we could easily turn that around. So, I mean, Sean, the one good point that Sean made is that it's a bargaining chip, and he's right. But we've got our own bargaining chips. Now, the one thing I'll say that was interesting about these tariffs, if they get implemented, is that a lot of those resources are owned by American companies. So what they're in effect trying to do is try to bring some of these American companies and their money back to the United States to manufacture that stuff in the States. But at the same time, it doesn't help them, because I don't know what the levels are like today, but I know there was a time not that long ago where we were the biggest supplier of energy to the United States in the world. We are still the biggest supplier of wood and water and uranium and on and on and on. So, I mean, this is going to hurt them as much as it hurts us, if not more.
Right.
Because they need that stuff. Now, anyway, I mean, that whole thing is a big issue that we could spend hours talking about. But quickly on the election tonight, and I'd like your opinion on this one. Somebody made a comment to me yesterday. I've been thinking about it ever since. Rather than spoiling the ballot, if you can't vote for NDP, Liberal, or Conservative, and you want to make a point, what about simply voting Green?
If you can, the Greens are running in every riding, right? I think they're only running 23 candidates, but it's a legit. Yeah, you're absolutely right.
Rather than just throwing it out and spoiling it and saying I can't vote for any of these parties, I think the bigger impact and the bigger message to those three main parties would be, I can't vote for you, so I'm going to go vote for, I might not agree with the Greens, but at least they have a clear message and mandate of what they're trying to accomplish.
Ryan, appreciate the call, sir.
Have a good day.
902-405-6000. Tony, how are you?
I'm good, Dan. How are you?
Feeling better now. I'm good.
You know, you all are talking about the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the three countries that are mentioned in Trump's rant are obviously Canada, Mexico, and China. Mm-hmm. But this tariff business that he intends, supposedly on his first day, to impose is going to affect the entire world economy. You got to look past your border and the border of the United States and Mexico and China, because this will reverberate in the markets around the world. This will reverberate on a bigger level. I totally disagree with what he's doing. I think he's being, if you want my opinion, I think with Elon Musk in his back pocket, or Musk has him in his back pocket, is who he's listening to, and they're going to squeeze the economy of the world. This is not just three countries. This is something that both countries, Americans and Canadians, should be aware of, absolutely aware of. And they ought to understand that there's no good comes from it for anybody. It's a lose-lose proposition. I don't know. I want to say that the American economy could probably stand it a little bit better than the Canadian economy, but I don't know that to be true. I don't have anything. I don't have any imperial data. You know what I'm talking about.
I got it, Tony.
Any truthful data to support that.
I wonder, anyway, Tony. Before very quickly, don't want to cut you off, but. I wonder, like this will play well with Americans off the start, because it's Donald Trump's whole mantra is America first, right? And it will play well. But once they start to realize that, hey, wait a minute, a lot of the consumer goods I buy come from Mexico or come from away, and they're suddenly 25% more expensive because of this tariff. I wonder if this blows back on them.
No.
You don't think?
No, because he doesn't care. You don't understand. He doesn't care. This is he is sitting in the throne. He does not care. It's going to go his way or no way. What he's doing to stop the drugs coming in from Mexico, which are coming via China, that's not going to stop a damn thing. It's not going to stop a damn thing. And imposing tariffs on Canada is not going to stop a damn thing. He says Canada has got an issue with immigration. Yeah, so does Mexico, so does the U.S., and so does Canada. So the entire geographical area has a problem with it. But these tariffs are not going to fix it. He is getting bad information again. He loves to hear what he loves to hear. And so his sycophants in the government are going to be right there petting him on the butt. This is a stupid idea, absolutely stupid. That's my opinion.
Tony,
but what I called about
sure, quickly, we're up against the break.
Are you up against the break?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do you want me to carry over, or do you want me to?
No, I got jam lines, man. I'd like to move on.
Okay, go ahead, brother.
I appreciate it.
I'm upset with the rebate. That's what
I'll talk to you tomorrow about it. How's that?
All right, take care. Have a great
Tony.
day. Thank you.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. That is the number. There's an awful lot to talk about today, but it seems that the tariff has caught the attention of many, and we'll continue that conversation on the other side. You are listening to the Open Hour on the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. We're back after the news. Welcome back to the Open Hour. Dan Ahlstrand here. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Our telephone number is 902-405-6000. Let's busy on the lines. Just a quick reminder to everybody that we are, there's not many rules here on the Open Hour, though today we are governed by a different body when it comes to the election. There are laws in this country that we have to abide by. So if you're going to talk about politics in Nova Scotia, I would suggest that I will ask that you keep the partisanship out of it. Maybe if you want to talk about your voting experience or that kind of thing. But we have to abide by the rules. Tomorrow we can take the gloves back off and go wild again once we know who the next Premier of Nova Scotia is going to be. So if you can do that for me, that would be fantastic. 902-405-6000, 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Rob to the program. Rob, how are you?
Oh, pretty good, Dan. How are you?
I'm good. What's on your mind?
Well, I went to my poll this morning and voted, and I was surprised. I was the only one there.
You're not the first. You're not the first person to tell me that this morning.
Yeah, that's sad.
It is.
Last election, I stood in line. So I hope that's not an indication of the numbers that are getting out there.
Let's cross our fingers.
But Dan, on the tariffs, I mean, I got to be honest, 25%. I mean, that's just a message. Hey, Canada, come on. Step up with your NATO commitment and do something about, we know our border's porous, right? So maybe we can, well, I think the border's pretty porous, isn't it?
Well, I mean, like, porous which way?
Well, there's, it doesn't matter which way.
It's kind of an American issue if it's coming into Canada, isn't it?
Well, it's an American issue if stuff is coming through down to the U.S. They have to deal with that, right? I would think. And we can, of course, do better dealing with the firearms, but it's still, you're managing your border. You still have to control what's coming into Canada that is going to harm us.
Right.
So, I mean, either way, if it's porous, it can be bad for you. And you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, either way, it's
not really
bad.
Rob, let me ask you this question. If Donald Trump sticks to his word, and I have no reason to believe he will not, and he engages in the largest deportation of illegal migrants in American history, where do you think they're going?
Here.
And that's an American issue, is it not?
What if he deports people, however he does it, if he sends them back to their source country,
right?
That's one thing. But the problem is, Dan, those people are going to start hauling butt
to cross illegally into Canada. So maybe we should put the tariff on the U.S.
Well, if it makes economical and business sense to do so, do it.
Right.
But the people coming across, the people are going to come before they're deported. They're
Right.
going to start hauling butt up here.
I hear
It's
you.
up to us to have a secure. Yeah, it's up to us to have a secure border.
Well, actually, the Americans should keep that problem in their own country, right? So then maybe they need to tighten their border controls.
I don't know. Can you? I mean, do we really? How do we keep people from leaving our country if they wanted to go down there? What can you really do? If they want to cross the border illegally and head into the States, what can we do?
You're missing my point, though, Rob, is that I'm going to suggest in the next 2 months that there's going to be a bunch of people that want to avoid being deported and are going to head towards Canada. And by the definitions of Donald Trump of a problem at the border, then we have a problem at the border. Is it not the same situation that we're seeing in Mexico and here?
I would think it's up to us to protect our border. Anybody coming into the country, that's a problem. Same as the U.S. They have people coming
Right.
up
So then shouldn't the Americans protect their border? Why is this a Canadian issue?
Oh, I don't think I said it was.
But that's what Trump is saying with this 25% tariff is that we have to take care of your border, right? So we're taking care of a border.
So what we have to do is we have to start meeting our NATO commitment, which is an embarrassment that we.
Well, that's not what this tariff is about. This tariff is about immigration at the border and drugs. He said it in his tweet last night.
Well, I don't know how many labs are out in. I don't know how many labs are in Canada and the stuff is actually flowing south. It probably happens. There are probably people that do cross into the U.S. That from Canada. It's up to the Americans to stop them, and it's up to us to stop anything coming into our country that can harm us. But the win, it could be a win if we start putting money into our military, if we start guarding our border, and these things will be negotiated. 25% seems harsh, but it's going to take a tough person to negotiate that. Donald Trump's not working for Canada; he works for them.
Right.
And we need somebody that's going to protect our best interests, and that's not Justin Trudeau.
So he's going to have a massive impact on the Canadian economy until we do what he tells us to do.
Well, we have to fight. We have to fight.
Kind of feels like bullying, doesn't it?
Sorry?
Kind of feels like being a bit of a bully, isn't he?
Well, I mean, look, I know, Dan, you're going to have all the Trump haters all lined up here all day long to just moan and groan, and it's business, Dan. It's business. If we have a product and there's a market, we have to negotiate. It's business, and it's. I think I expect more to come. Right? We don't know what it's going to be affected. I heard Danielle Smith in Alberta has already reached out to Trump too, and maybe we have to wait and see how it all plays out. But if you're looking for people just to get on here and saying, "Oh my God, Trump's this,"
no, I'm here to have a conversation, but I want to have an accurate conversation. I don't understand the logic behind this.
Well, I don't know.
This is going to put people out of business in Canada. Period. Without a question, it's going to put people out of business in Canada. And how does that work?
Well, it's not going to be good. But that's,
right,
like I said, why we have to fight for Canada. We live. It doesn't. The people down there are. He went in with great numbers, and the people, obviously, enough people love him because he's going to look out for them. Well, we need somebody up here looking out for us. And it's business. It comes down to that. It's not. I don't know what else I can say.
Rob, I appreciate the call. Have a good one.
Stay cool, Dan. Yeah.
Take care. 902-405-6000. It's business. Feels an awful lot like it's a little bit more than business, right? Donald Trump carries a big stick. He has, the second biggest economy in the world? I'm not sure if that's right. Maybe I know China is number one, but is the United States number two? If not, it's certainly in the top 3 or 4. And that's his big stick. But if you sit back and you look at this, I don't know how porous our border is with people leaving Canada to cross over into the United States. Might be able to make that, you can make that argument at the Mexican border. We can see the lines of people down there. Do you see lines of people here? And I will suggest more drugs comes from the United States into Canada than vice versa. I don't have any data on that, but I will venture to guess that that's the case. And I will guarantee you that more guns come across the border into Canada than go into the United States. So, Why the 25% tariff? 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Barry to the program. Barry, how are you?
Not too bad. They were talking to a bunch of economists from all the universities. You're looking at about 2 million people laid off. That's massive. They didn't even call it, they called it disastrous.
It is.
And every one of them, that's the only word. How people can find this good, and you can't negotiate with them because we have a trade agreement that's in effect till 2026 that he just said to hell with.
Yep.
So, and his logic, and half the people he's deporting have lived in the United States for 30 and 40 years, have worked hard and held jobs. But, he's not a nice guy. He only loves Donald Trump, and by now, if people don't realize that, it's scary.
Fair enough.
It's just the way he is. But no, we're going to have a 65-cent dollar minimum.
Dropped a penny last night on his tweet. One tweet, a penny of the dollar went away.
And by the way, I work for Highliner. Now, we stop fishing, and we're a value-added company.
Mm-hmm.
With a 65-cent dollar, buying fish on the world market, then trying to add value to it, and then sell it into the United States with a 25% tariff, that's probably impossible.
Not doing it. You're just not doing it.
And automotive industry, the parts, we have a $2.5 trillion economy. The States is $25 trillion plus. To play this way, he don't care because they're going to pay more too. But it's going to put more money in his pocket. And he said already, if you've been listening, and I've followed him all the way through, he loves tariffs. He's always said he loves tariffs. So this is what he's doing. And when our economy gets devastated, and you can't buy fruit and vegetables are going to cost a fortune because we are a winter climate. And with a 65-cent dollar or less, it's not going to be good. It's not. You think the homelessness and the food shortages now are bad? That just makes it 10 times worse. I mean, this is, if he does it, this isn't a scare tactic. This is really it could be, it's tragic and, like I said, disastrous. It is but the worst thing that could ever happen to this company in the last 40 years. That's how bad this is. And people that here calling up saying he's doing good to do this is almost ridiculous. Don't they realize? You said 75%. It used to be, I think they were saying between 67 and 70% now. Either way, whether it's that or 75, that's too much of our economy tied up into them.
Right.
And it's just a bad, bad thing. That people don't realize this. They would affect the 2 million layoffs. How could this country survive that?
Well, yeah, it'd be tough. Barry, I appreciate the call, sir.
Okay.
902-405-6000. The open hour continues on the other side of the break. You're listening to the Todd Veinotte Show. We're back in minutes.
Ask the girl what she wanted to be. She said, baby, can't you see? I want to be famous, a star of the screen.
Welcome back. A few minutes left in the open hour. A couple of open lines. 902-405-6000. Let's begin with Gloria. Gloria, how are you?
I'm well, Dan. How are you?
I'm okay. What's up?
I'm so concerned about this tariff.
Right.
That will be devastating to Canada. And when you think, as you said, of the lobster fishermen going out there today, how disheartening.
Right.
And the unfortunate thing, Dan, is that Trump, and we know what kind of a person Trump is, does not like our Prime Minister and does not like Chrystia Freeland. So it's pretty difficult to work with them. But I have a message, Dan. I have a message for Canadians. Every year, how many Canadians go down to Florida for the winter and boost Trump's economy? Let's stay home, Canadians. Let's show him that we can change his economy too, and let's stay home and spend that money in Canada.
I'm sure there's a lot of people that agree with you, Gloria.
So, for anybody who doesn't think this is going to hurt Canada, shake your heads.
Thanks for the call. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Patricia to the program. Patricia, how are you?
I'm fine, thank you, Dan. I've never spoken with you before.
Well, I appreciate you calling.
Well, I just want to make a comment about that fellow that was kind of like freaking out about our borders being porous.
Mm-hmm.
Canada is the number one country in the world that has the highest post-secondary education people. And we're too smart to want to venture down to the States to live there. We know what it's like down there. And when you said something about, 2 or 3 months, they're going to start coming up here. Well, unfortunately, Dan, that family from India who were frozen to death, any American who wants to come to Canada who tries that is going to be sorely disappointed because they won't make it.
Yeah, so it's tough going in the wintertime, that's for sure, particularly in the prairies.
Absolutely. Or even through New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, it gets really cold.
Yeah.
And I'm just sorry that fella seems to have drunk or been persuaded to think that we're loosey-goosey up here. We're just too smart to be hoodwinked like the Americans have been. So no problem. But the tariffs, we'll send it back to him. I'm sure we'll send it back to him, and it's going to reflect that we're not going to be pushed around. It will hurt us, but we've got lots of ammunition, and we're just not going to sit down and let him walk all over us. So anyway, you're doing a great job, and thank you for allowing me to put my 2 cents in.
I appreciate the call, Patricia. Have a great day.
You too, and Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Same to you. 902-405-6000. A contrary view from an email I'd like to get in very quickly. It says, hey, Dan, what Trump is demanding is 100% fair. Not because I like the guy, because I don't. It's not very well known that Canada has a lot of illegal immigrants enter the U.S. via Canada, and the same is true for certain drugs. Now, it wasn't that long ago that Canada reinstated visa requirements for Mexico here because so many of them were simply flying in and then just running across the northern border. There also been a few cases of people from Asia being killed, as we just heard about. It was India, actually. That's not 2 or 3 isolated incidents. It's just one that resulted in deaths. These people can get here by plane, and when they can't get to the when they can't get into the U.S., there's lots of drugs and guns coming north of the border. Yep, 100%, and said we need to remind Trump that they have work to do too. But we have to be have been way too open to who let in here, and way too lax on who we punch drug traffickers to claim are making a real effort. I think he meant to say punish. 100% do not support Donald Trump. He's terrible for Canada. He governs on a transactional basis, and so if he gets everything he wants this time, the tariffs will come back over NATO spending or whatever else he wants. My biggest complaint is that we haven't done more before now because it looks like Trump bullied us into fixing something, which is true. But I go back to my argument. I appreciate that, Jamie. I go back to my argument that I think he needs to look into his own backyard first. If you're going to base this tariff solely on illegal immigration across the Canada-U.S. border and the drugs, in capital letters he put drugs like fentanyl, it was in his tweet, or his, what do they call him on Truth Social? Anyway, his post. Then I think he needs to look at his backyard first. Because I think that once he takes office, or maybe between now and when he takes office, the exact opposite is going to happen. The drugs are already flowing north of the border. The guns are already flowing north of the border. And when people are trying to escape the ICE or the military that he intends to use to deport people, they're going to flood north of the border too. So look in your own backyard, Mr. Trump. 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Dave to the program. Dave, how are you?
Very good, Dan. And folks, get out and vote. That's
Absolutely.
all I'll say about the voting.
100%.
Listen, before you rant about the tariff, and that is nerve-wracking, of course, and it's possible. But look, we can also talk about NATO. We've been way under our NATO.
Not what this is about, though, Dave.
Well, I realize that, but hear me through. I know Gloria said, well, let's boycott going down south. I can't afford to go down south because our dollar's so weak. Oh. And yes, you said it went down 1 cent, but it's been weak it has been the weakest since 2020.
When did it drop?
Trump, I think it went down 1 cent last night.
It did.
Like
it went down a penny last night right after he put out his tweet.
basically you're paying 35 to 40 cents on the dollar.
Right.
That was not before Trump. Okay? So
Okay.
when it comes to trade, you're already losing 40%. And that's because we have a very wet noodle of a weak government in here right now, and he sees a vulnerability there. That's business. That's politics. Politics.
So when Pierre Poilievre wins the election, our dollar goes back to even par? Is that what you're saying?
I think we'll have a better chance with Poilievre because he's conservative. He'll be on the same wavelengths to a certain degree. He knows Trump is vulnerable, or pardon me, Trudeau is vulnerable. He's made a mess of this country. And by the way, he also said he made a big mistake, or a numbers mistake on immigration. And that's one of the problems we have in this country.
But that's not what this tariff is about. It's not about our immigration. It's about people leaving Canada to go to the United States illegally.
Can I also say something? Who
Sure.
was the commander-in-chief, Dan, the last 4 years down south?
Joe Biden. Yeah.
And that's the border problems, right? They flowed in under his. And another thing, too, that worries me.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth, Dave. I just want to make sure that I'm getting you here. You think that Donald Trump is in the right by doing this?
He can do whatever he wants, sir.
No, that's not what I'm
Whether it'll
asking.
work out or not. You have a government down there that's $37 trillion in debt, and it's serving the debt by $1 trillion every 6 months. Elon Musk is right. You cannot exist like this. So there's going to have to be dramatic changes. And I don't think he really cares how Canada does. We're just going to have to combat that. We're going to have to use our smarts and come up with some solution. But the guy you have in there right now is vulnerable. He's weak. He should have stepped out a long, long time ago. And yes, if we get the tariffs, I don't think it's going to be that dramatic, quite frankly.
25% tariffs not going to... You just said, Dave, I'm going to use your own words against you here. You just said that we have a 40% reduction in our dollar, right? Did you not say that?
But that's
right?
been correct for a long time.
Right. So now let's talk about those guys out in the boats this morning that are fishing lobster that are selling them to the United States, right? So they're already at a 40% premium on the dollar. Now you're going to add another 25 points on that. So now by my math, that's a 65% deficit that they have to. How can they possibly sell their lobster to the U.S.?
How much lobster goes to the United States?
A lot. China's number one.
You do know Asia eats a lot of our lobster. They love
They
our
do.
lobster.
But I'm just using that as an example because it's dumping day today.
Dan,
So explain that to me, Dave. No, Dave, my turn. Explain it to me how we're going to survive an extra 25% on every single thing we put across the border. How are we going to survive that?
Well, you know what? That's going to be our problem, isn't it?
75% of every good that leaves Canada goes to the U.S. 3/4. How do we survive that?
We have a leader who has messed this country up so bad. And
so it's Justin Trudeau.
And by the way,
Justin Trudeau is responsible for this. Is that what you're saying?
Come back with he's going to have to counter with something. And what do you think he can do?
Not much. Donald Trump is going to put that tariff on until he gets what he wants. I don't care who's in that chair.
I suppose if you're a good government, you will negotiate and you'll deal with it, but he's not a good government. He should have stepped away a long time ago. And quite frankly, what worries me is the Democrats also established sanctuary states, which is New York, Illinois, Washington, right along our borders. They've harvested these immigrants, put them in their sanctuary states, and they're going to run. Where else are they going to go? So we better have a strong border. I'll tell you one thing. For me to cross into Maine, it's very difficult. They check me out up and down, and I'm not obviously an immigrant as far as coming in from Mexico or whatever, Venezuela, and even Afghanistan they're coming in. All kinds of people are drifting into the United States. And yes, they probably will be attempting to come up here, so we better get our borders right.
So maybe the Americans should get their borders right, because they're going to cross the U.S. border before they cross the Canadian border, are they not?
Well, then you can thank Biden for that, can't you? Because he's made a mess of
So Donald Trump is totally in the right. In your opinion, Dave, Donald Trump is in the right by putting a 25% tariff on every Canadian product.
I didn't say that.
It sure sounds like you're defending him.
I think that'll be, and by the way, Keystone Pipeline is going to be reopened on day one as well. So there you go.
So, and then 25% of every liter of oil going across that border is going to get taxed.
Perhaps.
Right? Does that make any sense?
Perhaps. Depends where the oil's coming from.
Well, it's...
Anyways, it is, but you know what? You've had some very good callers, I just want to say, and it's, very, very educated callers. But when it comes to Gloria with the dollar is already about 40 cents. If you want to travel to Florida, this is prior to Trump, okay? And then you put that on trade, we're already hurting, and that's because of our government and weak economic decisions, as far as I'm concerned. So let's just hold our breath and take a step back and see where this all.
It's the Canadian approach, Dave. I appreciate it.
I think we're going to be fine, Dan.
Okay.
No worries.
All right, man.
Okay, cheers.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
And I appreciate each and every one of you who picked up the phone, dialed the numbers, and joined the program. Let's bury our heads in the sand, and it'll be okay. We'll call that the Dave approach. We'll be okay. What's another 25% tax on top of everything? We'll be good. We're going to stop and take another break. On the other side of it, Dr. Rob is here. If you have a science question, here's your opportunity. 902-405-6000. Science Files is next. All right, welcome back to the Todd Veinotte Show. I think I said right off the top of the program today that I was looking forward to a vigorous debate. I think we got that in the open hour. And I truly appreciate each and every one of you that picks up the numbers or the phone, dials the numbers and joins the program. And it's always a lot of fun. It may get the blood pressure up a little bit, but that laugh over there, of course, is Dr. Rob Thacker, who came in and said, Dan, do you need a hug?
No, I'm sitting there thinking, your blood pressure. Woo,
well, you see,
chill,
I think people really, because, if you were listening to the program on Friday, of course, you heard that Todd is starting his return to work. And Todd will be in tonight for the election show. So,
it's funny. I was thinking if Todd was coming back today, that would be quite the day to come back on.
Right?
Right, yeah.
Maybe maybe that was the plan. Maybe Donald Trump was saying, let's wait till Veinotte gets back and we'll put this tariff on. Anyway, and now that I mentioned it, we will be doing an election show tonight, 8:30. It will begin right here on 95.7 News Radio for all the results of the election that is underway and some context with a panel. And Todd's got a great program lined up, so I hope that you can tune in for that. But now it's time for Science Files. If you have a science question, something that's been bugging you, maybe the science of tariffs. No, we'll save that.
No, don't go there.
We'll save that for tomorrow.
Do not go there.
902-405-6000. Vanessa's going to turn my microphone off. 902-405-6000. That is the number. He's Dr. Rob from St. Mary's University. Dr. Rob, I guess the first thing is, and I know it's in your bailiwick, and that is the space travel. And as I understand it, they have selected a rocket, I guess is the right term for it, for the Dragonfly mission to Titan.
Yeah, so this is actually really amazing, and there's a little bit of a Canadian connection to this, but this is a project to literally fly a helicopter on Titan, which is one of the moons of Saturn. So it's got literally an atmosphere of nitrogen. It's really, really cold. On the surface, there are literally hydrocarbon lakes, right? And we know this because the Cassini-Huygens mission from a few years ago actually went down to the surface and took pictures. And so this is a really amazing idea that because it's such a dense atmosphere of nitrogen and really cold, if you spin a rotor in that, you get a lot of lift.
I was going to say, it's all about lift, right?
It's all about lift. And so in this particular case, Dragonfly is literally, I think it's about a 400-kilo helicopter that's going to be taken all the way to Titan and dropped down so it can fly around and look around on the surface. And I think this is going to be absolutely wild. Right, because it's one thing to go to Mars. Mars kind of looks like a desert, right? But Titan itself looks to be like a really weird alien kind of landscape. And I'm genuinely totally excited about this mission because it's going to take us to places that we've never seen before in detail. Okay, we had a few pictures, but it's going to be moving around and can't wait for that. And so the small Canadian connection I mentioned was one of my colleagues is now heading up parts of the JPL engineering section where this is actually being built. Right, so he's really one of the key players in seeing this go.
All right, I got a bunch of questions.
Yeah,
if it's that cold, and I'm assuming that the rotors rotate like any other helicopter's rotors would rotate. How do we keep stuff from freezing and breaking?
So presumably they're going to use alloys that are less impacted by metal fatigue. Right, so that would be my guess on that front. I mean, I don't know whether that means you're going to be using, I don't know, some plastics in certain places, right? But the challenge for me is probably the lubricants, right? And what you're going to do there.
Yeah, because anything that moves has to be lubricated, right?
Yeah. So I'm not sure what they're going to do about that, right? That would be really interesting to know. Of course, we have experience of running machinery down in the Arctic and Antarctica during really cold temperatures. So presumably there are some options. I don't know whether it's some regular grease or whatever, but definitely, yes, flying in a really cold environment is going to be tricky.
And the length of time, how long does it take to get to Titan?
It's years. right? It's going to be a few years. I mean, this is one of the things that when you have a complicated craft going, it's sitting in a colder space for a long time, right? And that's it's not like going to Mars where you've got a few months, right? This is a few years, so it's gonna take a while.
The engineering must be, again, more questions. Obviously, it's going to be controlled.
Hey, that's what we're here for.
Be controlled from Earth,
Yep.
right? What's the lag to Titan when you input a command?
But it's going to be a lot like we see with Curiosity and so on. It's going to be able to do things itself. It has to, because I mean, you're looking at several tens of minutes to get out to Saturn. I can't remember what the delay is, but I mean, instead of like the 20 minutes that it is to Mars, I mean, it varies depending upon where Mars is relative to the Earth. You've got to look a lot longer than that. So it's going to have information coming in every now and again. I presume it will be able to relay to something in orbit, right? That won't be a problem. But the thing that's in orbit is then relaying back to Earth. So a lot of this is going to be autonomous for sure.
How far can signals go in space?
Well, in theory, they can keep on going and going and going, right?
How do you aim them, though, right?
Well, if it's radio, it doesn't matter too much. It just sort of spreads out and gets weaker and weaker and weaker. So with light, it's another thing altogether. I mean, we talked a little bit about using lasers for communication. And for that, you have a very correlated beam, so you do need to point that. And like one of the things I thought that was really funny was they had this mission that was flying around the moon and beaming a signal back to the Earth. And of course, that's all well and great until you have clouds.
Oops.
Yeah, exactly. So it doesn't work for that. And so you have to have line of sight, right? For laser communication, you have to line of sight. But with radio, you just essentially broadcast it out there, it gets weaker and weaker. And then it's basically, there is a limit on how much information you can send depending upon the strength of the signal, all right? That's the key thing. So with something like this, you won't be having a lot of information sent. Literally a few K is probably the data rate. It's like worse than probably worse than, certainly to New Horizons, which went out beyond Pluto, the data rate of that was worse than dial-up. Like it was, I think it was literally 2K. So something in Saturn is probably like maybe 10K or something like that, I would guess. I don't know for sure.
It's in constant communication? Like it would be...
No, everything will be timed, right? There'll be wake-up calls, wake-up checks and things like that. So it will all be timed and all be on a schedule. I'm kind of curious to know what the plan is in terms of the quality of the movies they're going to send back. We can send stuff back from Mars pretty well because it's close enough that the signal strength is enough to transmit a fairly reasonable amount of data. So I'm not quite sure what Dragonfly is going to send back in terms of the quality of movies. That could be a limiting factor, actually.
And this is another feather in the cap of SpaceX and Elon Musk because they've selected Falcon Heavy to do this.
You know what? The only other thing I think they could have chosen was Atlas Delta or something like that. So I'm not surprised that SpaceX won it. Right? I think they've kind of got a lock on it because Falcon Heavy is working pretty well. I'm not even sure that they've lost a Falcon Heavy yet. Right? So, yeah, I'm not surprised they got the contract.
$178 million.
I mean, to be frank, it's going to sound crazy to everyone, but that's actually pretty cheap.
On a grand scale, I would imagine, right?
No, seriously. For a mission like this, that's actually a pretty cheap launch cost.
All right, we're going to take our first break. Science Files continues on the other side. Tommy's on the line. He'll be first up when we come back. You're listening to Science Files. He's Dr. Rob. I'm Dan. We're back in minutes. Welcome back. This is Science Files. The telephone line number is 902-404. Telephone line number. Listen to me. I'm starting to sound like I'm from 1973. Anyway, the telephone number is...
So good.
Keep on trucking, Dan. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Tommy to the program. Tommy, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Your question for Dr. Rob, please.
I was curious about the speed of light, why we only see it like the light when we're looking at it directly. We don't see it going by us. Like the only way I can explain it is, like if I was staying on a railroad track and I see a train coming directly at me and I could just see the train. And if I step off the track and let the train go by me, I can see the side of the train, but I don't seem to see the side of the light. Okay, go ahead.
Great question. Okay, so there are circumstances under which you could see that, right? And so let me give you an example. So if you're in a really, really dusty room and there's no light and someone turns a flashlight on, you know you can see that beam wherever you are, all right? And the reason why you can see that is because as the light is going through the room, it's hitting the dust particles and then it's scattering off those dust particles. And you can literally see that. That's one of the reasons why you can see, like you go back to the movies from the Second World War with the massively powerful searchlights and so on, you could see those beams. So sometimes you can see them, but that is a product of basically a material being in the atmosphere and the light scattering off that. If you don't have that, and you literally have light that's just going through a vacuum, then light doesn't really interact with light, right? That's one of the key things about it. It will go through wave interaction, but that's about it. It's not going to scatter in a way that just comes off in a random directions and comes towards you. So that's really the key reason. If you're going to see light sort of like going past you, you got to have something that's actually going to scatter that light, and so you can actually bounce it off in a certain direction so you can see it. And generally, in a vacuum, light doesn't interfere with other light, and that's the main thing.
I lost you, Tommy. I'm sorry. I think your phone cut out. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000 is the number. It would be wild if we saw like things float. I see enough stuff floating by me as it is.
I'm just going to say the answer left him speechless. So, yeah, I mean, it would be really weird if we lived in a world where light really scattered off other light a lot, right? Because then you would I think you'd kind of lose track of where the light was coming from.
It would be like vertigo on times 10, right?
Yeah,
There'd be all kinds of things.
Very weird. Yeah.
It's a good thing we can.
Yeah.
What's the speed of light?
186,000 miles per second, 330,000 kilometers per second.
I didn't even tell him I was going to ask him that. How's that? Right?
I'm probably off by significant figures, but anyway, that's how I remember it.
Tell Dan anything he won't know. 902-405-6000. Rafe, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. Your question, please.
I had a question for Dr. Thacker. I heard on last week that I think it's Cape Breton was getting a wind generating plant that produces hydrogen. Is that right? And then they produce ammonia from that, and then they ship it to Europe. Is that right? Did I hear that?
Yeah.
How do you make hydrogen from a windmill?
So it's literally the energy that's generated by the windmill, as you call it that, so by the wind generator. That's then taken to an electrolysis, right, where you're going to be separating, if it's water, hydrogen and oxygen, but you can do it with methane as well. And so that will be the way that you create the hydrogen. You're literally giving energy to a process that will separate hydrogen from another molecule, and then you will get that particular hydrogen stored as a result of that. And then you can then take that hydrogen and do other things with it, like you mentioned, creating ammonia and then storing that and then shipping that to Europe, which I think is a really silly thing to do because it's just not energy efficient.
Because then you got to ship it on ships and tankers. And
it's just, I don't know what to say. I mean, I understand why we have subsidies that are making this possible, right? I understand that because you need to create the technology and make it more efficient. That's one of the things that we do with technology subsidies. But then once you've done that, we are going to be locked into a situation where we have to have 10 years of subsidies, and that creates all of these economic possibilities, which, of course, people are going to take advantage of.
Right. I mean, no use for it in Canada? That's not a big enough market.
That is a good question. And so where the sort of like mainstream thinking on this kind of situation is, there are going to be industries that really need the hydrogen, right? And so creating fertilizers, potentially, this is really interesting. Steel industries could really use hydrogen as well. There's an awful lot of stuff that has to be done about that, though, to convert over to using hydrogen in steel. So what you would do if you really could sort of like plan these things in a very macro way is to have what's called a hydrogen hub. And then you have a bunch of industries that depend on hydrogen, chemical industries and whatever, all in the same place near the source of hydrogen. So you don't have to ship it. You don't have to compress it. You don't have to turn it into anything else. And then it's efficient to do it that way.
Okay? Right. Made right on site. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Rafe. 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. I've never understood why markets in Europe that need hydrogen don't make it there.
I don't understand that either, right? Because, I mean, the problem with hydrogen is it's just not a good thing to transport. Its energy density is not very high. You have to compress it or turn
an
it
empty
into something
ship
else.
heading, like there's no weight, right?
I just don't get it. I really don't, right? Someone tell me it works because of the subsidies, that's fine, right? But once the subsidies end, that industry ends, right? And that's the challenge that I have with it, right? It's not to knock the people trying to make a buck. I'm not going to do that because you make money within the systems that are presented to you. But you genuinely have to wonder, and there's been a lot of talk about this in the States because the Inflation Reduction Act in the States is a huge investment, although goodness me, what's going to happen with that over the next couple of years? But anyway, and one of the things that they were literally worried about was that there was so much subsidy for creating hydrogen, you could literally create it and burn it because it just creates water, and they'd make money, which is bonkers, right? So there's literally a line in there that says you can't do that. Right, you have to send the hydrogen somewhere and for something. And then you see people sort of suggesting, oh, let's mix it in with natural gas, which is, again, not a clever thing to do, right? Because all of the pipelines that are built for natural gas are not built for handling tiny little hydrogen atoms, which are much, much smaller, right, than methane. And so they will have an impact and degrade the pipeline. So there's only a certain amount of hydrogen that you can mix in with it. And it's just not a good power source. I'm sorry, I'm a physicist. I have to be honest about these things.
So
right?
That being said, there have been discussions, and we've had them on this show about hydrogen as a source for automobiles. Would that be something? Obviously, we're not there, but there's work being done on it. If we have the infrastructure in place, would then that be beneficial to, say, Nova Scotia if we had a hydrogen generating plant, if hydrogen vehicles take off?
I mean, certainly the transport costs are going to be less, but even then, right? So there's a guy in the UK who winds everyone up. He's called Michael Liebrich, right? And he's basically an analyst, and he looks at all of these things, and he really has no sacred cows, right? He'll go after anything that he thinks is inappropriate, no matter what it is and what political spectrum it comes from. And so when you look at the energy density of, say, gasoline, you would need, I think it's over 15 trucks of hydrogen to match the energy density of one truck of gasoline, right? And that just makes it inefficient, right? So that's why you need pipelines for hydrogen. But you can't use the pipelines you've been using for natural gas because they're just going to degrade if you put pure hydrogen in them, right? Because the hydrogen literally goes into the metal and brittles it. Right, so there's all sorts of issues with it. It's, again, not to knock hydrogen having certain uses. It really does, right? But building this whole hydrogen economy doesn't make sense when you have something like electricity, which actually, as long as you have good enough batteries, is pretty portable, can be transmitted around. Yes, we would have to build bigger infrastructure. Ironically, we have Sven Skoltisik of Net Zero Atlantic coming to talk at SMU about this on Friday. But there's a lot of stuff you have to do with electrification. But at the end of the day, I actually think it makes sense from an energy perspective.
902-405-6000. Science Files continues on the other side of the news. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. He's Dr. Rob Thacker. We're back in minutes. Welcome back to the Veinotte Show. Dan Ahlstrand along with you. This is Science Files. He is Dr. Rob Thacker from St. Mary's University. The telephone line's wide open, 902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. If you have a science question, something's been bugging you, here's a great opportunity to let Dr. Rob have a crack at it and see if he can decipher it or figure it out.
And even if I can't, we'll have a good conversation about it.
Yeah, we were chatting before, right when we kicked the show off today, about this new Dragonfly rocket and the super heavy rocket that's going to carry it. I guess it has to be an enormous amount of thrust, right? When they move these things, you're essentially sitting on top of an exploding bomb when you take off. It has to be incredibly noisy. How loud's a rocket launch?
Oh yeah, I mean insanely noisy. So I mean, NASA spent a lot of time in the 60s measuring the sound impact of the Apollo launches. People may not be aware, but one of the reasons why you have the flame trench underneath, people remember they turn on the engines and suddenly you see stuff shooting out the sides. not only is that redirecting the flame, that's also trying to suppress the sound as well. So that's flooded with water to cool things down and to suppress the sound. And so it does have a suppression effect. Musk has gone to a really quite different way of doing that. They actually have a whole bunch of inverted, incredibly powerful shower heads that are firing water upwards and then hitting the exhaust. And that will have a similar damping effect. But in terms of the overall amount of noise, right? So a jetliner taking off, depending upon where you are, is about, there's a big debate on this, but it's between 120 and 160 decibels, which is crazy loud, damage to hearing if endured for, I don't know, more than a few seconds, right? For the Apollo Saturn V, 204 decibels. Right. Now, there is an issue with how you measure a decibel. The further away you are, obviously, the lower the sound. So that, I think, is normalized to technically a meter away. And, of course, no one is standing 1 meter away from a rocket like that, right? You'd literally be blown apart. So the question is now, I mean, how loud is Starship compared to the Saturn V when it's essentially double the power? And the answer is no one's got a really good handle on it
We don't
yet,
know, Dan.
Right? No, so and the reason why is really interesting. It's because it's actually quite difficult to make the measurements of the sound, because when you have to be literally a couple of miles away, right, because otherwise everything gets broken, there are atmospheric effects that come into play that are actually quite significant. How the wind is blowing, what's the humidity, and things like that. And so it's really funny that there was a paper published and everyone was like, okay, how loud is Starship? And they're like, well, we're not sure yet. And so there's going to be more research done on this. There are obviously more launches that are being done. And so there's evidence that the space launch system that NASA has created, which is going to be used for Artemis and things like that, that's very slightly quieter than the Saturn V. And they think that's because of the configurations. The X configuration on the Saturn V was actually quite noisy, whereas the 4 engines on the SLS versus the 2 boosters, not quite as noisy, which surprised people because solid rocket boosters are in general considered to be more noisy, right? They're very sort of like an uneven burn. They have things sort of like going crack, 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 and so on. And so when it comes to Starship looks like it is at least as noisy as the Saturn V. I think we can agree on that. It's a question of how much noisier it is, because all of that feeds into structural integrity concerns of buildings and things like that.
And that was my next question. Why all the engineering on making this, dampening this noise? Because really, I mean, who cares? Like, let her go But this thing could knock windows out and damage buildings.
Exactly. And so this was one of the main concerns, certainly about maritime launch up in Canso, like what was going to be the impact on structures that were within like a couple of kilometers. I will say the type of rockets they're proposing to launch there are much smaller. They're still going to be pretty noisy, of course, but they're much, much smaller than Starship, which is just a 33 engines, right? It is an incredible amount of power. But what amazes me is they launch it with all of this infrastructure around it. And I'm amazed by that, because they must have carefully thought about what kind of structural damage they would get, and they seem to be capable of coping with that, which surprises the heck out of me, right? When you look at sort of like the Apollo launches, they were marching this thing miles and miles and miles away.
Oh, right. It was dragging up on...
Yeah, exactly. And so SpaceX, I don't know, they seem to have figured out some ways of basically building... I don't know, whether it's structures that are capable of surviving this level of noise.
That or they replace them very quickly, right?
Yeah.
Because they use the same, I don't know if it's heavy, but one of the SpaceX rockets actually comes back to where it was launched from with the chopsticks.
Yeah, so I mean that is incredible, right? I'm just going to say that is one of the most amazing pieces of aero engineering I've seen, right? Because it's not only flying the most massive rocket ever, you're landing the booster, which is bonkers, right? Absolutely bonkers that they did that first time. Now, funnily enough, they haven't been able to do it since. Right? They actually had to abort on the last mission. But even so, that's crazy. I mean, if you'd gone back to the 60s or 70s and said, oh, yeah, we're gonna land the Saturn V booster, everyone would go, no, you're not going to be able to do that. Right? But now here they are doing it, which is pretty incredible.
That's why Kennedy and the space centers are all on the coast, so that you could splash the boosters,
drop stuff in the ocean. Right? Yeah, exactly. Yep.
902-405-6000. That's 902-405-6000. Let's welcome Alexander to the program. Alexander, how are you?
I'm fine, Dan, and hi, Dr. Thacker.
Hi there.
Your question, please.
Dr. Thacker, I was reading that the planet Jupiter is made up of 90% gas. Is that correct?
I would presume so. I mean, it's called a gas giant.
Yeah. So also I was reading that a lot of stars are around the same makeup. But is Jupiter a failed star, or could it have been a star? in its past?
Okay, I get where you're going. In a way, you can sort of like it's not big enough to create enough central pressure to start nuclear fusion, right? And so the next stage up from Jupiter would be something that's big enough to have a little bit of that going on. Certain elements are easier to fuse than others, and so we would call those brown dwarfs, basically. So it's not big enough to get up to that stage.
Okay, great. Thanks again.
Thanks, Alexander. 902-405-6000. If you have a science question, lines are wide open. That the difference between a brown dwarf and a red dwarf.
Literally just the temperature, right? So when you get up to a red dwarf is kind of where we think of like the traditional stars ending. Brown dwarfs are in this weird space where only certain reactions are going to be possible. Red dwarfs are stars that just go on and on and on. It's like the Energizer Bunny of the stellar population. I mean, they just keep on going because they're burning so slowly, right? When you have this, it's kind of funny. This may surprise people, but when you have a really, really massive star, right? Let's say, pick a huge number, 80 times the mass of the sun. The amount of pressure that's involved in that allows it to drive the nuclear reactions really, really strongly. And so it will consume its fuel much, 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 much faster as a big star than a small one, right? And so you have this weird situation with stars that when you think, oh, it's bigger, it's going to be around for longer. No, it's the complete opposite, right? The bigger the star is, the faster it burns out, right? And so the very sort of like earlier stars in the universe, we think probably had a bias towards being really, really big. The universe was very, I'll call it pristine. There was just primarily hydrogen and helium. And so we think that first generation of stars, once they formed, they were really, really big. They burn out really, really quickly. And then they started ejecting higher, I'm going to say higher atomic number. So elements other than hydrogen and helium into the medium that is the gas between the stars and so on, and created a second generation of stars through that. And that happened pretty quickly, we think.
So there's a parent star and a bunch of kids.
Yeah, absolutely. And so potentially as well, if you have a bunch of these forming together, because stars generally like to form in groups, they're kind of, you want to call it social, right? Because when gas is collapsing down, there's normally more of it than just enough to form one star. There's normally plenty of it around. And so you form stars generally in sort of like tandem. And so if they form at the same time, and they're roughly the same size, they're going to die at the same time as well, and then they're going to release their energy all the same time back to the medium around them. And if they're supernovae, they're big enough, then there'll be this big shock wave going through the medium, and that will actually begin a new generation of stars because it compresses the gas and starts making it sort of condense down under pressure or under gravity.
It's almost self-replicating. It's self-generating. The stars continue to make stars.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
They don't divide; they make new ones.
That's right. And so I sort of argue that stars are like the universe's greatest recyclers, right? Because they're literally every time you create a star, you're going to go through a process of converting hydrogen and helium into other elements. Either it ends as a white dwarf if it's small enough, or it ends in a supernovae. Either way, material is flung off, right? And you end up creating another generation of stars after that. Now, the composition of that gas is going to change because you're going to be going from hydrogen and helium into sort of other elements over time. But it takes a very, 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 very long time for us to actually sort of get to the point where, no, these things are too heavy, because you have to get up to iron, basically. That's the only thing and above that won't fuse properly.
Red dwarf goes on and on and on and on, just like the television show did.
Yeah, it was funny to begin with, but...
Went on way too long.
Yeah.
People are like, what are you guys talking about? Anyway, it's a British show. Yeah. We're going to stop down, take our last break. He's Dr. Rob. I'm Dan. We're back in minutes. All right. Finish line is there. I can see it. 902-405-6000. He's Dr. Rob Thacker. This is Science Files. Dr. Rob, we got an email question. Comes to us from Tom, and it says, can you please ask Dr. Rob what he knows about the status of the Maritime Space Launch Facility? And that was cancer that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, MLS. So my understanding is they're still kind of in a fundraising mode for that. So there's been a lot of talk about, various rounds of funding and so on. But I do know that they've made agreements with... who is it? Canadian company, Reaction Dynamics, I think. So they have a very specific orbital launch vehicle that they would love to be able to launch from a Canadian site. And so that was announced back in September, October time. So I heard about that. But to be honest, I haven't heard much more along those lines. I mean, if you look at what's happening with the overall organization, I mean, they brought a lot of people in who have connections, let's put it that way. So whereas initially perhaps they might have been seen slightly as outsiders, they brought in people who really do have connections in the Canadian space sector. So that's been a significant boost for them.
902-405-6000 is the number. Speaking of the Canadian space sector, you and I were chatting about this before we came on the air, and I learn something every day. Sure. It's the joy of my job. That being said, I did not know that the Canadian Space Agency, or at least scientists in Canada, were developing our own lunar rover.
Lunar rover, yeah.
I didn't. It looks like one of the droids from Star Wars.
Yeah, so Gord Azinski at Western Ontario, who I know, Gord's great. And so, yeah, this was actually talked about a few years ago, saying that the Canadian Space Agency was really interested as part of Artemis. What could we do in terms of like having a lunar rover? And so Gord has been working on this for a time. I don't know much about the mission, if I'm completely honest, but most things that we have that end up becoming lunar rovers are really about sort of like for a country like us, when we haven't done this before, it's going to be about learning about a lot of the robotics of that and so on. So one of the difficult things with any kind of technology development is you have to develop it. Right? You don't go to 60 miles an hour from scratch.
Is there a lot of sharing that goes on in that community? I mean, like we've got the rovers on Mars, and we've had rovers on the moon before. I mean, do scientists share that stuff, or is it like closely guarded secrets?
There's a reasonable amount that's shared, right? I mean, so sort of like the concepts are always shared, but the engineering details, especially when a lot of this is done by private contractors, not necessarily. I mean, some of this is obviously bound under IP and so on. There are, in some situations, like particularly with the US, like the US won't export certain technologies to China, right? And so you can impact things that are related to that sometimes. And so I'm sure that there are Canadian companies with all of their IP and so on that they're going to be closely protecting. When you have things that are developed, though, on the sort of like with a heavy university influence, in general, most of those don't tend to be so heavily involved in what you would consider like contractor space defense contractor type technologies. And so, for example, let's talk about JWST, right? That used technologies that had been deployed elsewhere, but very often people would say, well, do we know this is going to work? And the developers and contractors would go, it's going to work, don't worry. It's going to work because they've worked on it before.
Right.
And so some of those do eventually sort of like filter into the public domain in a different context. So that will happen as well.
So what would this rover do? Is it just go up there and drive around and study the geology, or what?
That would be my guess. I mean, you don't have too many choices on the moon. The moon is not somewhere where we're going to be doing a whole lot of excavation, right? It's reasonably well understood. We have literally hundreds of pounds of moon rocks that have come back. So we have a pretty good idea of what the makeup of the moon is. And so in this particular case, it's going to be a lot of learning. It's going to be a little bit like the early sort of like Sojourner on Mars, I would think is probably a good analogy, figuring things out and actually developing the technologies to do that.
This thing was pretty small. The pictures I saw, it wasn't very large in size. My vision of the lunar landscape is these great big craters and everything else, but I would imagine there's a lot of places that these little things can get into that they don't need to be massive in order to
no, I mean, absolutely.
Everything.
I mean, to a certain extent, if you want to have something that's nimble, then you want to go small, right? And so a lot of the stuff that we see on the moon in particular, it tends to be we see so much from the Apollo missions, right? And so then you're coming down, so you don't really have a good sense of scale until they actually get down on the ground. And then you don't tend to see other than the astronauts hopping around. And so there you can see a lot of the surface is actually, fairly smooth, right? The lunar rover was obviously something that went around fairly effectively. Gosh, that's one car I would love to drive. But anyway, because, I mean, driving in low gravity has to be such an interesting experience.
Dune buggy on the moon.
Yeah, no, seriously. And so at the end of the day, you need something small to actually go around. But the problem is whenever you make something small, it has less power, so it's going to go less, okay? So really, there'll probably be some geological stuff that they do with it, like you can do seismology and you can do mineralogy. You can always put particular instruments to measure the kind of minerals that are on the moon as well. But again, there's been a reasonable amount of that done already.
This thing's covered in panels too, because I would imagine because of its proximity to the sun that we're able to use a solar battery on it.
Yeah, so you can do solar on the moon. It's actually a really great way to get energy on the moon. I mean, there is talk, of course, of taking, I think it's a bit crazy, but a nuclear reactor to the moon, a small modular nuclear reactor as part of Artemis X mission, whenever that will be. But no, if you just need a few tens of watts, then a solar power is as good a way to do it as any on the moon.
Would nuclear reactors work the same way in zero gravity? I imagine you have to build them into the ground, right?
Yeah, I mean, presumably the actual cycle of putting the steam through is somewhat different, but I mean, it's not a zero gravity environment, right? And it's a question of how they have to pressure it. So I'm guessing it's probably a pressurized water reactor, right? And so that, I don't know. I don't know whether they're going to fly that or not, right? That's certainly been talked about, though.
You mentioned that there's like hundreds of pounds of moon rocks that have come back. Do we still have to learn a lot about the moon, or are we about done with it?
So here's the thing. I think in terms of the geology of the moon, I think we do know a lot about it, right? I mean, there's always more that you can learn. Like we're still sort of like trying to figure out like the far side of the moon versus the near side. There's a very significant
Great name for an album, by the way.
Sure. And so really the key thing that we're going to be learning with Artemis that's different from Apollo is really trying to work in the lunar environment. It's not a nice environment. And so not only is there radiation, there's a lot of sunlight, the temperature changes and so on, but the lunar dust is really not nice stuff. It gets into things. It's very sharp. There's nothing to sort of like erode sharp edges down on the moon. Everything stays sharp. And then learning to deal with that is going to be a big part of going back to the moon. This is not sort of like, what can we discover? What can we learn about the moon? This is really, how can we learn to work in these kind of environments? Which you might think, well, do we really want to work there? That is a good question. Because in the big scheme of things, I don't think there are a whole lot of economic arguments for going to the moon, right? People will talk about, I don't know, helium-3 and things like that, but really there aren't a ton of economic arguments for it. So it's really about going back as a staging post for going further.
Until we find a mineral on it.
Well, who knows? I mean, we don't know what's beneath the surface, of course, right? We can make guesses and so on, but presumably there may be some large impacts somewhere that had similar things to up in Sudbury, where you have a whole lot of nickel, right? Or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, I think if you really pin people down, most of the time they'll say there's not a great economic argument for going there.
Where they tested the lunar rover. In Sudbury.
Yeah, there we go.
Right? It used to. I was through there last summer. It's a completely different place now, but when I was a kid...
Oh, yeah. It looked like the moon.
It looked like the moon.
Yeah. No, seriously. They've done a huge amount of reforestation there, which is pretty impressive.
It is pretty impressive.
Yeah. And it's amazing when you fly in because you can kind of see like a little bit of the history, but there's a lot of young trees coming up as well. So it looks really quite different.
Yeah, it was like black rock, and that's all it was. Anyway, Dr. Rob, as always, this hour flies by. Appreciate your time.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for the questions.
And we will see you again next week. That's going to do it for this edition of the Todd Veinotte Show. I'm Dan Ahlstrand. Don't forget, and I'll remind you once more, that the election show will go tonight. The polls close at 8 o'clock. Our show begins promptly at 8:30. Todd Veinotte will be here. He's got a great panel of guests that are going to join him, and our news team here will be working very diligently behind the scenes to get you all of the information that you need when those results come in. And hopefully, with any luck and fingers crossed, and I know Vanessa's fantastic and she will make it happen, that we'll be able to get at least some of the politicians on to the radio tonight. And we're going to work to get all three party leaders onto the program for you tomorrow. As much as we can promise it, that's what we'll do. Sometimes when politicians aren't successful, they are not very quick to pick up their phones the next morning. But we're going to do our best to bring them to you so you can hear from them tomorrow morning right here on the Todd Veinotte Show. Until then, everybody, thanks again to all of our guests for joining us and telling us a little bit about what they're very passionate about and makes for great radio. And thank you to everybody who joined the conversation and dialed the numbers, took time out of their day to join the show. I truly appreciate it when you do that. Vanessa, awesome job as always behind the glass. Until tomorrow, everybody, stay out of trouble, and remember, be kind to one another.